Why are Gulf states silent on Gaza?
If you look at it, none of the GCC countries have ever fought any war with Israel. They have not been part of any of the wars that has happened between the Arab countries and Israel, whether in 1956 or 67 or 73 or later on.
If you take a look at the Palestinian cause, there's an understanding that they betrayed it because they did not fight, and that's the reason why Iran came as the savior.
For India, it is a competition. For India, it is an opportunity. From the point of GCC countries, they don't want to put their eggs in the same basket. They have learned from the past mistakes.
Really? I think it's going to go
Next few
nuclear.
years.
I think Russia is going to, the way it just signed a comprehensive agreement with Russia, I think they're going to go nuclear with Russia's help.
Howsoever geopolitics you bring, it will not work.
So it's at the end of the day how much money is transferred.
It's all about money.
It's all about money. और Donald Trump is going to love that statement. Hello and namaste. मेरा नाम है डॉक्टर दीपानिता और आपका स्वागत है जियोपॉलिटिकल डायलॉग्स पे. आज हमारे गेस्ट हैं प्रोफेसर मुदस्सिर क्वामर, जो कि हैं एक्सपर्ट गल्फ कंट्रीज के ऊपर. उन्होंने कई किताबें लिखी हैं, आर्टिकल्स लिखी हैं, किताबें एडिट भी की हैं ऑन दिस टॉपिक. वो खुद सऊदी अरेबिया विजिट भी कर चुके हैं और अभी जो हाल ही में इनकी किताब आई है वो है टर्की अंडर एर्दोगान, और जो किताब आने वाली है इस साल के एंड में वो है पर्शियन गल्फ के ऊपर. तो आज इस पॉडकास्ट में हम बात करने वाले हैं क्या है गल्फ कंट्रीज और इंडिया का रिलेशन, क्या है गल्फ स्टेट्स का पर्सपेक्टिव ऑन डोनाल्ड ट्रम्प्स आइडिया कि गाजा में क्या होने वाला है. कई सारे इंटरेस्टिंग चीज़ों पे बात करने वाले हैं. बट सबसे पहले लेट मी वेलकम आवर गेस्ट टू दिस पॉडकास्ट. सो वेलकम प्रोफेसर क्वामर एंड थैंक यू सो मच फॉर जॉइनिंग मी.
Thank you.
सबसे पहला जो प्रश्न है, और उस पर मुझे पता है आपने लिखा भी है, व्हाई आर गल्फ स्टेट्स साइलेंट ऑन गाजा?
There are many reasons why Gulf states are not very vocal about what is happening in Gaza. They are not silent completely. For example, recent days when the proposal came that people from Gaza should be relocated to the neighboring countries, they outrightly rejected it, especially Saudi Arabia. But there are geopolitical issues that explain why they have not been as vocal as, let's say, Turkey or Iran. And that is that they have security interest, they have geopolitical interest, they have a strategic interest with the United States, and they don't want to be part of a conflict in the region. They want a peaceful resolution to what is happening between Israel and Palestine. And they also view Hamas as a problem, as an ideological problem, as a problem in terms of creating insecurity in the region. So they do not want to vocally support an organization that perpetuates extremism, that perpetuates terrorism in the Middle East. But when it comes to the rights of the Palestinians, they have very well expressed their opinion that the Palestinian statehood is non-negotiable.
But Professor, out here, my question is that when we talk about Donald Trump today, and he is in news constantly, he has said the solution to both the problems, whether it is Russia-Ukraine or whether it is the Israel-Palestinian issue, lies with the GCC. If Saudi Arabia would have suddenly, produced more oil, Russia's price would have gone down. It would have stopped the war immediately. When it comes to Israel-Palestine, he says that the Arab countries should have done more. So somewhere or the other, he is constantly pointing at the Arab countries, especially to the GCC, for not doing enough. Do you think that's a correct narrative, or what is it that you have an understanding of what the GCC is aligning with?
I think this is a very misleading way of explaining or understanding situation or global politics or geopolitics in the world. The war in Ukraine is not the making of the Gulf Council countries, the GCC countries. It was Russia that invaded Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine because of what it perceived as a threat of NATO's expansion. So whatever was happening or has happened is between the US, NATO, the European countries and Russia, and in between obviously Ukraine. So saying that the resolution lies with the GCC countries or Saudi Arabia is, I think, extremely problematic in many ways. And why should Saudi Arabia compromise on oil prices on which it depends. Its economy depends. Its future depends on a certain degree of stability in the oil market, a certain degree of level of prices in the international oil market. And Saudi Arabia is looking after its own interest. The GCC countries are looking after their own interest. When the war in Ukraine started, they had to work out their food security plans. So they were also affected. But to put the onus on GCC countries for resolving, same is true with what has happened over the last 15 months between Israel and Hamas. It was not Saudi Arabia or the GCC countries that created the problem. In fact, if you look at it, none of the GCC countries have ever fought any war with Israel. They have not been part of any of the wars that has happened between the Arab countries and Israel, whether in 1956 or 67 or 73 or later on. And they have constantly called for peace. They are not the one who are supporting organizations or groups like Hamas. It is Iran. It is to some extent countries like Qatar and Turkey, that too in some ways cooperation with Israel. So again, saying that the onus lies on Saudi Arabia, I think it is too much to expect from a country which is looking after its own interest.
So the expectation is also that the GCC is going to fund Gaza's rebuilding, which they will. Because if you take a look at the Palestinian cause, there's an understanding that they betrayed it because they did not fight, and that's the reason why Iran came as the savior. This narrative needs to be also kind of challenged by the GCC countries. In that light, where do you see GCC coming in now that the ceasefire has come into action?
There are 2 points to this question, 2 answers to this question, 2 dimensions to this question. One is, have the GCC countries actually betrayed the Palestinians? Historically, I would not argue, or I would not really support this argument. If you look at it, the GCC countries like Saudi Arabia or UAE, had their own limitations. To what extent they can actually support the Palestinian cause, and to the extent they would have been able to support, they did. They did provide funds. For example, Saudi Arabia was trying very hard to bring some kind of consensus among the Palestinian factions, especially Hamas and Fatah, in the in the mid 2000s, when they were really fighting. There was a civil war between Hamas and Fatah, and they tried, they mediated. They in fact had the agreement in Mecca. There was and where they agreed that yes, there would be a consensus and there would be a united Palestinian front. If you look at in terms of financial fundings and all that, they have done that. So to suggest that they have betrayed, I would say that is going beyond, that is a bit of an exaggeration. I wouldn't say they have betrayed. But yes, whether they could have done more, that is a question which is many people ask. Maybe.
But that is what the narrative that Iran is also pointing out, that you have betrayed, you have not fought for them. And Iran is legitimizing its support to Hamas, Houthis and Hezbollah based on that narrative.
What is the solution? Is a perpetual fight, a perpetual conflict, can that bring a resolution to the Palestinian issue? Can there be a possibility of peaceful negotiations based on a united Palestinian effort? That has not happened. What does is, I mean, okay, let's say that the Palestinian resistance is fighting against Israel, a very justifiable fight against occupation for the rights of Palestinians. Where have the Palestinians reached? They are in a position today where the most powerful country in the world can simply say that we will replace the entire population of Gaza and create a Riviera of the Middle East where everyone can live. Is this the solution that Saudi Arabia and other countries should look for? I don't think so. The Saudis don't want this solution. They want the Palestinians to be able to live peacefully side by side with Israel, a two-state solution. Can that be achieved through military conflict? I don't think so. Historically, if you look at it, the Arabs and Israelis have fought. What has it led to? It has not resolved the issue. So the approach is different. They also support the Palestinian cause. They support a two-state solution, but they support it through peaceful negotiation, through maybe international mediation, and they also are ready to recognize Israel. There is a very important issue here, whether the countries who support Palestine or whether the Palestinian factions, are they ready to accept the existence of Israel as a state, or would they insist on what is often called in many groups and narratives as river to the sea?
Mm-hmm.
If you insist on something like that, is it viable? Is it feasible? Or is it justifiable? So there are many issues that needs to be understood. I would argue that the Saudis or other Gulf countries also want a two-state solution. They want it through peaceful negotiations. They do not have the ability to enforce a solution.
Mm-hmm.
They would like the Palestinians to have their own state, have put up a united front, which the Palestinians have not done. So there are many dimensions to it. And obviously Iran wants to play this card against the Palestinian card against the Arab countries, the Gulf Arab countries. But look what it has done to the Palestinians.
Let me come to another issue that is there in Middle East right now, which is the fall of Assad family. The new regime in Syria, the HTS, coming into power. What is GCC's take on it? It has been supported by Turkey, but what is GCC's take on it?
The GCC states are looking at it as an opportunity to, have a more stable Syria, to a Syria which is more friendly to the GCC countries, which is ready to do business with the GCC countries, and which can look after the interest of the people of Syria, and also does not undermine the interest of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries like Saudi Arabia, Oman, the UAE. So they have been engaging with the new leadership in Syria, which so far in the short time when it is in power, the kind of rhetoric which it has shown, which it has come up with, is positive. It's whether it is actual reality or whether it's
photoshopping,
it's just a narrative, it's just symbolism.
Yeah, true.
We'll know it only with time. But so far, the situation seems to be going in the direction where countries like Turkey and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, especially Saudi Arabia, are ready to engage and cooperate to have a Syria which is stable and which is unlike what it was in the past.
But interestingly, I'm going to come to this same point from a different way. So after so many years, Turkey is also leading the Arab League, right? After decades, it's now leading the Arab League, and which is something that was once upon a time was kind of not taken into cognizance. But do you then see that there is some kind of a geopolitical alignment that is happening between Turkey and the GCC?
The Gulf Cooperation Council countries, especially Saudi Arabia, I would say, let's say Saudi Arabia and Turkey. The reconciliation process started sometime in 2019-20, when both Turkey and Saudi Arabia, they realized that the way forward is to have a region where they can resolve differences through talks. There are differences, there are problems. And as an extension of that, even Saudi Arabia and Iran have talked, and there was a rapprochement mediated by China. So as far as Turkey and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, Saudi Arabia is concerned, they do not have a very similar view on what kind of Middle East they want. So Turkey would want a Middle East which is more Islamic, which is dominated by Turkey, where Turkey can play a more pivotal role, where Turkish military have more space, where there are no Kurdish, independent Kurdish state or independent autonomous Kurdish region in different countries where Turkey can do business. Turkey can supply military equipment and so on. While Saudi Arabia would like to have a Middle East which is status quo, which is not changing, which is dominated by the regional countries, which is where the US plays an important role as a security provider, where there is a possibility of business and where the primacy of Arab countries is not undermined. And there are differences, but they are ready to work together. And at this point, they see that there is a lot of common interest. There are lots of common shared issues where they can work together, and they are ready to work. And we are seeing some of it in Syria, some of it in Iraq, and also maybe if there is a process that leads to greater resolution of the Palestinian issue, there might be greater cooperation between Turkey and countries like Saudi Arabia in Palestinian issue as well.
Right. So now let me bring the India angle to it. And one thing that we have been observing the last year is that there has been more political engagement between GCC and India. There was a foreign ministers meeting that happened for the first time. India-GCC meet happened. There is now a proper summit-based interaction that's happening. There is a lot of FDI flowing in, especially from UAE. There's a constant buzz going on. And why I keep using the word buzz is because in our UPSC prelims and mains, the buzzword is very important because what has been in news, it is asked. And last year, if you observe, UAE was constantly in news when it came to India-UAE relations. So do you see that there is a renewed interest in Indian policy circles, especially in MEA, about India-GCC relations?
The GCC is one of the most important regions as far as India's foreign policy is concerned. This is a constant. It has not changed, let's say, for the last 20 years. And there is a now, I would say, greater recognition in the policy circles about how significant, how vital this region is. Whether you talk about energy security, whether you talk about international shipping, whether you talk about issues like counterterrorism and combating radicalism, or even preventing organized crime and coastal security. In all these issues, India has to cooperate with the GCC countries, and the GCC countries view India as an important partner. If you talk about India's international trade, the GCC as a bloc is the largest trading bloc for India in the entire world.
But I'm going to interrupt you right here. For us, it has been important, but for a long time, they have given importance to Pakistan vis-a-vis India. So how is that sudden change happened there itself?
Gradually, since the 1990s, the GCC countries started to recognize that it's the economy which matters. And they realized, they also understood that India is a land of opportunity. India is a country where you can do business, where you can do investments, you can do trade. There are immense possibilities. They also at the same time understood that Pakistan is a problem. Problem because of its extremist tendencies, problems because of its inability to manage its house, a problem because of political instabilities. So, and their dependence on Pakistan formerly because of security relations, that has also gradually come down because of Pakistan's inability to really provide security. There was a time when the Gulf countries depended on Pakistan, even though their larger dependence was on the US. There was a dependence on Pakistan also in terms of military personnel, military training, and so on. That is no longer the case. They are talking to India. You look at the India-GCC, especially India-UAE and India-Saudi military to military ties, that has increased substantially. Saudi cadets and officers are coming to Indian military academies for training. There are joint exercises with all the branches of the military. So the GCC countries' worldview has changed gradually, and today, if we talk about today, they look at India as a big power, as a country with immense economic possibilities, as an inevitable partner in their quest for economic diversification and for a future where they can look for prosperity for their own people. And that is where and same is true for India. So there is a commonality of interest, there is a convergence of worldviews on how to go about the future. And that is why you would see that India-GCC countries are, as you said, the buzz. So the buzz is there and it will continue.
But what about China? When you're talking about economic prosperity and everything, look at the numbers. The Neom city in Saudi Arabia, biggest investor remains China. So for them, China is going to be more attractive if it just remains economic. We need to diversify too much more so that they can look at different areas of cooperation. Because if it's just economy, China will always have an edge over us, right? So what is your opinion about China-GCC, India-GCC relations in that light?
China is also economically attractive for the GCC countries and for obvious reasons. Look at the numbers.
Exactly.
They don't lie. And China's attraction will remain. There is no doubt about it. For India, it is a competition. For India, it is an opportunity. From the point of GCC countries, they don't want to put their eggs in the same basket. They have learned from the past mistakes. So they don't want to put their eggs in the same basket, all of their things in the same place. They don't want to invest only in China. They don't want to have strategic relations only with China. They want India as well. Just like China has opportunities, India also has opportunities. They are also doing it with Japan. They're doing with South Korea. They're doing with Malaysia and Indonesia. So for them, all of these Asian economies, which are growing much faster, which are much more dynamic, which are much more welcoming, are an attraction. So is China, so is India. For all these countries, obviously there are opportunities in GCC countries. There are issues of convergence that needs to be tapped. That is where India's agile diplomacy comes in. How agile you are, how your ability to actually seek that opportunity and then capitalize on that opportunity. That is very important. And then there is obviously geopolitics. We cannot completely ignore geopolitics. And that is something where India has an advantage. And that advantage is because India is not looking at expanding its influence in the political sense of the word. It's looking for business. The focus is on the economy. The same cannot be completely said about China. China is a more ambitious power. Why? Because it is in a competition with the global superpower. So yes, there is some advantages as far as India is concerned, and I think that is where India needs to capitalize. Our policymakers need to capitalize.
So then, according to you, IMEC is definitely going to happen, right? Despite the recent turmoil in Israel and Gaza, the IMEC is going to take off.
IMEC is an opportunity. IMEC is the...
But interestingly, Saudi Arabia is not a signatory to it. Saudi Arabia has not signed the Abraham Accord. But if you look at the IMEC, it passes through Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia is not a signatory to Abraham Accords, but Saudi Arabia is a signatory to IMEC. It is, if you look at it, the IMEC is the brainchild of India and Saudi Arabia. Other countries came along. Israel, UAE, US, the European Union, Germany, UK, Greece, they all came along.
The funding is completely by PGI, G7.
Yes, US came along, obviously. But in terms of idea, it is India and Saudi Arabia. And why it happened? Because they understand that there is an opportunity here. Saudi Arabia is transforming its economy.
But isn't that interesting? I'm sorry to interrupt you again. that on one hand, you don't want to sign Abraham Accords because of not recognizing Israel, but you are also talking about having a corridor that transverses through Israel. So how does that dichotomy work then?
Let's go back a little to situation pre 7th October 2023.
Okay.
Where Saudi Arabia is on record saying that we are on the verge of some breakthrough with Israel. Why? Because they were hoping that this economic opportunity will lead to a situation where it will also advance the Palestinian interest, where the Israelis will have a stake in a Palestinian statehood. Even what kind of statehood, that's a different issue, but there would be a stake. That changed because of 7th October, and then what happened after that? Did Saudi Arabia instigate October 7th attack? No. President Biden, the former US president, is on record saying that perhaps IMEC was the reason why the Hamas and countries like Iran supported something like this. There are problems, obviously. The region is very volatile. At this point, the fragility and volatility is very, very significant, very visible. But I would still say that IMEC is an opportunity. For Saudi Arabia, most importantly, and obviously India as well, but for Saudi Arabia because for its economic transformation, for the kind of vision which Saudi leadership, King Salman and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, have, cannot be realized if they are not connected to the world. And they are not better connected to the world, to the region as well, to South Asia. Go back in history, if one goes back in history, all trade between India and the Mediterranean region used to pass through the Arabian Peninsula. Indians and Saudis are just trying to revive that old trade route, and it will work.
It will work, the shortest route right now, but there's another trade route that is now functional, which is the INSTC, International North-South Transport Corridor, which is based out of Chabahar Port. Now, if IMEC and INSTC both work, it's win-win for India, definitely. But it's also going to be a matter of, a conflict emerging between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Because both would be, kind of energy ke liye, they will be both, kind of going for that game. But more importantly, it is going to also create a competition between both of them, both rival countries. How do you see that panning out?
These are, if you look at IMEC and INSTC, the route and the destinations are different.
Yeah, one goes via Iran to Russia and the other goes to Europe.
Both
are energy supply lines.
One goes to Mediterranean and through Mediterranean to Western Europe.
Yeah.
One goes to Iran and then from Iran to Afghanistan and the Caspian and then to Eastern Europe and Russia. So the destinations are different. Now, you very rightly, correctly said that if both works, and in my view, both will work with their own pace, their own ways. Look at the economic opportunities and the kind of economic value in terms of value of trade. Value of trade. Easily, the Mediterranean and the Western Europe is much more compared to INSTC because of the resources, because of the market. So it's a business logic, and eventually it's the business. If it makes business sense, it will work.
Would bring geopolitics here. With the way the world is shaping up, wherein we have two axes coming in, do you think it was just going to be business logic, or you're going to have axis influence coming in? Because one trade route comes under the Russia-China influence, basically Russia's influence, and the other trade route would be by the G7, which is the Western countries. And if we are hurt the way we are moving towards the crisis between these two axes, India, of course, it's a win-win for the business logic, but from geopolitics, it's going to be a disaster.
Nothing can be disassociated from geopolitics.
True.
Everything has some politics to it. And whether IMEC or INSTC, they have, certainly. And we know that there are, so it's maybe, let's say, it has started with a geopolitical reason. The reasoning might be geopolitics. But will it sustain only because of geopolitics? No. You have to bring business into it. If the business works, it will sustain. If the business doesn't work, howsoever geopolitics you bring, it will not work.
So it's at the end of the day how much money is transferred.
It's all about money.
It's all about money. Oh, Donald Trump is going to love that statement. Let's bring now Iran into the picture. We have already talked about INSTC, the Chabahar port. Iran is at a point of time where sanctions are imminent with Donald Trump coming in. Iran is also looking at new partners because it has now been cornered again, especially after the somewhat elimination of its proxies. At this point of time, how is India going to balance Iran and GCC?
India has done well in balancing its, relations with different countries in the Middle East, in West Asia region, whether it is Israel, Palestine, Israel, Arab countries, or Iran and the GCC countries, and it will continue to do so. I don't think that is a problem. There are certain interests which compels India to have continuous engagement with Iran, especially because of what is happening in Afghanistan, because of the security reasons, and also because there are some economic logic to it. Iran has energy. INSTC and Chabahar passes through, through Chabahar, INSTC passes through Chabahar, and India has some trade with Russia and Central Asian countries and the Caspian region, which is also energy rich. But compare it to what is happening with GCC in terms of trade. It's minuscule if you compare it with GCC countries. So obviously when it comes to, and then India has a very vital interest as far as GCC countries are concerned. The 10 million Indians. You can't just ignore your citizens who are, living in the GCC countries, earning their livelihood and sending remittances to the tune of almost 40 billion to India. So when it comes to cost-benefit analysis, the GCC, India would be more inclined to the GCC countries, and that is what we have seen in the last few years. But Iran remains important. As far as Iran, US and the regional dynamics is concerned, let me stick out my neck and say that Iran is in big trouble.
Yes.
And what we are going to witness would be perhaps a very devastating phase as far as Iran is concerned in the next
I think it's going to go nuclear. I think Russia is going to, the way it just signed a comprehensive agreement with Russia, I think they're going to go nuclear with Russia's help.
Iran has been trying to get nuclear, and they are on the threshold for a very long time, and they would still go for they would go for nuclear weapons option that is very much there. But in today's world, does the nuclear weapons give you complete safety net? I'm not yet sure.
I agree with you, but the way Iran has been using the nuclear card for some time now to negotiate is something that it has realized with Donald Trump it cannot do. It's very clear the way Donald Trump is favoring North Korea. Kim Jong-un is a reasonable guy in quotes, has called North Korea a nuclear state now. In all of this, it does seem that a show of strength is something that Donald Trump is going to respect, which is something that Iran is going to do. Mostly sanctions are on its way. But yes, there will be another turmoil in the coming years, especially with Iran now joining the Russia, China, North Korea axis. We are definitely going to see a different kind of Middle East coming in. But now let me bring another aspect to this question, is about the BAPS Hindu temple, because a lot of buzz was created about the fact, especially because our Prime Minister went on record to say that a Muslim-dominated country, a Muslim country, has given land for a temple, and that just shows how much the relations have improved. Can you just shed some light on this matter? How important is that particular temple construction for India-UAE relations and for the region?
One, the UAE and other Gulf Cooperation Council countries, the GCC countries, are trying to put up a moderate view of Islam, and they are bringing the issue of tolerance, inclusivity in their domestic politics as well as their foreign policy. So I would say that this foundation and building of a temple in Abu Dhabi is part of the larger plan and larger policy of the UAE to have a more inclusive society where people of every faith can have their own freedom to worship and freedom to go to their own place of worship. Now, as far as India and UAE relations are concerned, this is something very, very important. It is in some ways path-breaking moment, because this kind of soft power diplomacy, this kind of cultural diplomacy has not happened in the past, and that is something which redefines how India and UAE look at each other. They do not look at each other only as transactional partners. They look at each other as strategic partners, as cultural partners, as civilizational partners. And that is something which is important as far as India's broader Gulf and West Asia policy is concerned.
I'm going to ask you a controversial question now, which is, you just said that the Gulf countries are trying to portray a more moderate Islam. But across the world, we do see a rise in radicalism. And now when you see both these sides, is it because of the way the countries are, portraying a moderate to Islam? Or is it because there is no single leader of the Muslim world, as we call it? The questioning has started emerging that who is going to be the leader of the Muslim world? They're all betraying the cause by becoming more moderate. So because of these narratives, do you see that transition happening across the world?
See, the rise in radicalism is something which is happening across regions. And as far as radicalism of the Islamic variety or the jihadist variety is concerned, we have seen how devastating it has been for the West Asia region, for the Middle East region, and then its impact on the broader world, in Europe, in India, in South Asia, and so on, or for that matter the problems in AFPAC region. But that there is a recognition, there is a realization that it doesn't really lead you anywhere. And the GCC countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia, and other countries as well, Egypt, Jordan, they recognize that extremism doesn't lead to constructive progress. It leads to devastation. So that is where the change of understanding is. This has, as I said, this has a lot of opportunities as far as India.
The portrayal of a moderate Islam, being more tolerant, will give right.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to bring another aspect of about GCC. Please share some understanding of how the internal dynamics is. So when I teach GCC in my class, I usually say the Bade Bhaiya is Saudi Arabia and the youngest is UAE, right? And the youngest will always do what the elder says. The problem happens with Qatar, who does not want to listen. So if you could just talk about the internal dynamics, especially about Oman and Kuwait, where are they all placed?
The dynamics among the GCC
countries in GCC.
There was a time when GCC was a coherent bloc as far as politics is concerned, politics and geopolitics is concerned, and there used to be all decisions taken through consensus. And obviously, Saudi Arabia being the largest country, most populous, richest in terms of resources and all that, it had greater say. The nature of politics among GCC countries has evolved, has changed. Because the smaller states have become rich, UAE, Qatar have become rich, and there is less degree of consensus on each and every issue. There is a space for UAE to have its own policy. on regional matters. There is space for Qatar to have its own policy, which it has done and which led to a lot of problems among them. And the problem has not been resolved. It is still there. It's just that they decided that, okay, let's ignore the differences and focus on the commonalities. But the nature has changed. So Saudi Arabia no longer imposes its will on other countries, and the other smaller countries, especially Qatar and Saudi Arabia, UAE, are no longer necessarily ready to accept everything that Saudi Arabia wants them to say, or Saudi Arabia's point of view. That does not mean that it is no longer a bloc. On certain issues, for example, if you look at economic issues, there is still a bloc. On issues like what is happening in Syria, they still have a very similar views. On Yemen, for example, there has a lot of similarities in terms of what they want in Yemen. But there are differences also. For example, when it comes to Qatar, it does not view political Islam as a threat or as a primary threat to regional security and stability. Not with Saudi Arabia and UAE. They see political Islam as a threat, as a number one threat to the stability in the region, their own security also. So there are variations as well. And that is the dynamics. I mean, it's no longer about the wishes of just one country.
So you want to say they come and negotiate with even Saudi Arabia being into the negotiations? Because it's very hard to believe as a country, the sheer size, the resources, it would definitely have a more dominating influence in the group.
It still has dominating influence, but there are always negotiations. There are negotiations, there are differences, and there are gives and takes.
Right. In all blocks that happens. Which brings me to the last question, which is about India's Act West policy, and a very important component is the de-hyphenation policy. The de-hyphenation policy basically talks about India's, Israel relation is distinct, is separate from India's Palestinian relation, and thereby India's Arab relation. So do you see this de-hyphenation policy as a success in, if I ask you as a report card, do you see that despite all the statements being released and the crisis continuing, you see that the hyphenation policy has...
It has worked. It is a very successful policy as far as India's Act West is concerned. And why it has worked is that eventually all countries recognize that sovereign countries will have their own policies and they follow their own interest. If India has interests with Israel, it will follow that interest. If India has to have some stand on the Palestinian issue, then just because it has relations with Israel, it will not abandon that. So Israel also understands that India will not abandon its support for a Palestinian state or a two-state solution just because it has good relations with Israel. Similarly, these Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and even the Palestinians, they realize that if India has interest with Israel, it will follow its interest. It will do business with Israel, it will buy Israeli weapons, it will sell weapons to Israel. But that does not mean that it will not have any relations with the Gulf countries or the GCC countries or Arab countries or even with the Palestinians. So the de-hyphenation policy has been, I think, it's a good way of looking at things, and the countries recognize that it's a sum-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game.
Which brings me to one last question. I know I said it was the last one, but how probable do you think is the two-state solution? Because our de-hyphenation policy is pinned on the two-state solution. So how probable do you think it is?
If you ask me personally,
yes,
my personal view, and that is something which I held even before October 7. The two-state solution is dead. But that is the only probable solution that can resolve the issue.
So when we don't see a two-state solution, what is the probable then solution? Because even though in the entire world across, the only solution that they're talking about is a two-state solution. Now with Gaza being completely bombarded, rebuilding will take years on to end. Where does the entire solution then lie?
I would say the only viable solution, the only acceptable solution The only solution that can perhaps satisfy all the stakeholders is the two-state solution. But it is dead not because it cannot be done, not because it is impossible. It's possible because there is a degree of inability of the stakeholders, including the Palestinians and the Israelis and the powers that mediate between Israel and Palestine, to enforce it. It's not dead because it is not viable. It is dead because nobody is ready to work on it. That's the problem.
And that intent is missing for years and decades right now. And because of which the conflict continues. This region is constantly on fire, crisis constantly. And one can say it is because of resources, because of identity differences. There could be a reason, numerous reasons, but at the end of the day, it is the collateral damage. It's the civilians who suffer. With this, we come to an end to today's dialogue. Thank you so much for joining me. It was a very interesting one, and I hope you guys have also enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, take care. Bye.